Welcome to Adjusting the Lens, Forced Opportunities, a podcast featuring stories of individuals living their lives and doing that well in spite of having a disability. My name is Karen Kowalski. I am an occupational therapist and will be your guide on this journey. During this episode, I will be introducing you to the story of Joseph Cali. Hello, my name is Karen Kowalski, and this is...
I'm Joseph Cali.
So Joe was a teenager who came from a family, as he says, of auto body guys. And he was unsure about his future as a teenager. He enjoyed spending time with his friend on a catamaran and played competitive paintball on a national circuit. Very impressive. He was someone who focused more on the now than inspirations and aspirations towards the future. But that all drastically changed when Joe sustained a C5 spinal cord injury when he was 20 years old. Joe, can you explain what a C5 spinal cord injury entails?
Sure. So when it comes to those classifications, I don't know what the current stuff is. It was a very long time ago. But C5 is just referring to different spots on your spinal cord. And my injury was sustained high in the neck, and therefore C5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the way I learned it, when I was told by all the doctors and explained to me, kind of works like a pipe with water. Wherever you're injured, the water stops flowing beyond it. And so whatever signals were going below that side of injury don't get to the parts of the body. And so having an injury at C5 allows pretty much everything above it to work because water's getting to it, quote unquote. But that's where it stops, and C5 happens to, I guess, be responsible for a lot of like upper body stuff, shoulders, chest perhaps. So therefore, that rendered me paralyzed roughly from the chest down. That's what that C5 business refers to.
Mm-hmm. So you can move your arms, as we are seeing that, and you have hand and finger movement as well.
Actually, no, that's where something I learned, again, very much a crash course.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess C5, it might look like I'm using my hands, but it's just really my wrist is able to flex or extend. I forget that term. But there's no finger function. It's just really just shoulders, bicep, and wrist. I don't have triceps, so I couldn't do this. Those PTs and OTs who are watching know what this is all about. But that's roughly it. And then below that, there's no real voluntary control.
Right, but you can adapt to, I saw you open up a door before. There's different movements that you learned when you were in rehab to help you to, kind of accommodate for that challenges that you had. So you still can interact with your environment through your hands, but just adaptively.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the reasons I'm wearing the glove. If I'm not wearing this for any protective reason, it's just that the fingerless glove, I can put a fork and spoon in it, my toothbrush in it, and even when I'm typing, it kind of holds my hand in such a way. So when it comes to all that adaptive stuff, that was huge for me to learn different ways to do the same thing, which is very much, I understand, what the whole point of OT is to help people figure out new and adaptive ways to do everything they can do in life just differently.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. So Joe spent 2 months in the hospital and then 5 months in an acute rehabilitation facility. Mm-hmm. Amazingly enough, Joe, you returned to college right after you finished your rehab. And then you started taking your philosophy courses and then really fell in love with reading and just really seemed to just have such a life change, even, cognitively at that time and, emotionally. So you moved from a life of, focusing on partying and sports and all of that. And now you're, a little bit more introspective and reading and philosophical. And then you were guided towards a helping career as a result. And I found it very interesting that you did, from what I understand, an internship both at the rehabilitation facilities and another one that you received services at, and you were able to then work with individuals similar to yourself.
Yes, I was very grateful to have the opportunity not just to have good treatment and services as a patient, but it was an interesting part of my, what I would say, rehabilitation, that I also in a way got the privilege to be on the other side of the table or desk and see what I can do to just even be there for people, to hear them out, because sharing what I experienced and hearing what they experienced. But it was quite an experience, to say the least.
What were some of the words or phrases or support that you provided to people, like some of the counseling phrases that you might have given to people?
Well, at the time I had like just begun going back to college, and especially early on in that time, I didn't know much at all about psychology or counseling, and when it comes to like just my interactions with patients and stuff, it was mostly being there as an emotionally supportive role. I had the liberty to talk to them and like quote unquote give them advice, but to be honest, I found that almost the last thing I would do is give advice. I always got a queasy feeling when people would give me advice about how life goes or this or that. I know it came from a good place, but I just felt that people's experiences are different, and often I found that just hearing people out was what they needed. And especially when it came though to the extent that I would say advice was given, I kind of developed this notion that it's probably best just to lead by example. So when I went there, I would make sure I was clean shaven, looking good, and to the extent that I talked about my experiences, I would highlight all the good stuff that was going on in my life. I was going out with friends again, pursuing college degree, dating, like all those things that I don't need to tell you about it with my mouth, you could just observe it. So I thought that was in a way a much more effective way of getting that advice quote unquote across. Let me do what this guy's doing rather than just me shoveling out aphorisms.
Right, that's brilliant, and definitely a good way, way that you kind of saw all the reading and the absorption of the reading that you had at that time. That was very good, and it seems like maybe you became even more of an introspective, active listener as a result of your injury as well.
Indeed, I would say one thing, they say you have two ears and one mouth. It really changes you to start to listen, and also was therapeutic in a way for me, because to now connect to people who are sharing in roughly similar difficult situations as I was, that it took the bite off of being paralyzed somewhat. One thing I very clearly remember when I returned home was, I was in Kessler for the longest time, and everybody was around me who's disabled. Then I go home and nobody around me is disabled. That has an effect on you, So to have that connection, I think that helped soften the blow.
How did you make that transition when you went home? Because it's like a drop off, from like you getting all the supports and the therapies, and then like you're out in the real world. So how did you work through that transition?
It was kind of a long, slow, gradual process, much like everything else I would describe in my own recovery and rehabilitation. But coming home, there was the initial kind of surprise and shock at first. We got the air mattress, the wheelchair, and the bathrooms modified. The exact how, I honestly don't think I have a full answer for that yet, even today, after I've been injured for like 18 years almost. But I would say it was in part the support from my family, just people being there for me, even just tangibly, like just to get me around and move me around and help me around, but even in just kind of socially, informationally, that people were just there to still like interact with. So there was the social support. Some of it was the returning to college. Again, I mentioned the philosophy because I went to it, just as a quick aside, because it was the closest thing to psych. Sorry, I took psychology as a degree in undergrad because it was the closest thing to philosophy that the campus was offering. But when I took the class, kind of opened my eyes to like it was something about the profundity and deepness, that allure of deepness that almost like promised an answer to something, a question that I don't even know how to ask, to be honest. But that's what drew me into it. It had that allure of a promise in a way. And it did, in a way, deliver on its promise, because one thing I learned is all about, it's perspective taking. It's changing the way you think about things, which, as now a trained counselor, that's what it's all about, So I think that was a big piece of it too. And I mean, those are the two big ones: social support and, my own little intellectual developments. So that really kind of helped it a long way. And talking to people, of course, finding out what other people do to rehabilitate back to the world.
Right, wow. And that's interesting that you really, kind of quickly changed to a different role too, to being of the student, where, before your injury, you were not, really looking at that as an inspiration. And then, you lost the role, you lost the role of being, a party guy and like sports and the paintball and all of that. But, it seems as if, you're regaining of a role or getting a new role of being a student and getting really immersed in that, just helped to kind of, pull everything together, more for you as well.
Yeah, it had this weird like feedback effect, and something I very much think should be told to anybody who's going through these ordeals. There was a time where I kind of like rationalized to myself that, well, if I just kept reading books I would not be distracted from being depressed.
Mm-hmm.
It seems a little dark and twisted and sordid, but it in a way kind of, though it was just a shortcut or a simple fix at the time, just to give me a moment of reprieve from any kind of emotional turmoil, by reading, by doing these things, it slowly built up a repertoire of skills that I could then use in academia, in the future, et cetera, et cetera. So while it was just this simple fix at the time, it enabled me to grow into something much more. So I think that was a big part of it. And so it naturally inclined me to get more into academic as escapism, almost away from the trauma. But in doing so, it started to build everything necessary for my recovery.
Mm-hmm. And then from there, tell a little bit about your next jobs and the next steps that happened as a result of your degrees.
Well, in pursuing the degree, and then you have to decide what are you going to do for grad school and where you're going to go in the future. And with a psych degree, I transferred to get a rehab counseling degree, which led me actually to meet you in the class, as you introduced earlier. That's why I was at that school. I was pursuing my master's degree at the time, and I was just really building up the role, the requirements to go into counseling, to, in a sense, work with disabled populations, feeling that I have something to contribute through my own experiences, but as a professional as well. And so, long story short, with grad school, I wound up actually becoming an adjunct professor now, which after grad school I applied, sent resumes out like everybody else does, and I also work for the federal government. Can't go into too much detail with that, but I am certainly in a capacity to help the public who are disabled. And I think a significant part of my experiences, but also my training as a counselor, really makes me so much more effective in helping people, get the services they need, connecting them to the resources in the community they need, and even just lending a sympathetic ear sometime.
And that also because of your own personal experience and navigating the system and advocacy, and what a wonderful thing, and grateful for any of your clients to have you as their to work with you.
Well, I find that too, like just the experiences I've had being disabled myself, I almost routinely, they come up where I'm like, oh, did you try this? Oh, this is an access link service to get you back and forth. Just like the stuff that, in a way, I needed to just get back to my life is something everybody needs, right? Those basic access to things. So a lot of stuff people don't know about unless they're disabled, But because I'm disabled, I was able to have those, the phone numbers for all those different social programs and stuff. And I'll just refer people. I'm like, oh, you can check this out. They do this, they do that. Oh, you could have relatives get paid to care for you, and at home, and even though they're sacrificing their jobs to care for you, they could at least get some compensation. There's a whole litany of social programs that people just don't know about, and so to be able to clue people into that, I'm really grateful that I can do that.
Great. Now tell me, we can diverge a little bit here, but
sure.
You have such a beautiful family.
Thank you.
And a lovely wife and 3 beautiful children. So
when they're behaving.
Yeah, for sure. And balancing being a new dad for anybody of any different ability it can be such a challenging thing. But even let's back up a little further. How did you, being a cheesy romantic, how did you propose to Rachel? I'm so curious about that.
Okay, so we get to the dishy stuff.
Yeah, please,
the
dish.
dishy stuff. So we met in a very inauspicious way. We met online. It was a dating website that was free, very similar to Tinder, where if you click like on the person and they also click like on you, it connects you to have a conversation. And we just chatted for a few months, and then we finally decided to met in person. And we just kind of hit it off. My wife was from Missouri, and she was living in Jersey with her dad. Her dad's company moved them around a lot. She was living in Jersey, but what the very lucky situation was that in meeting her apartment complex was shared a parking lot with a train station. And at the time, I didn't have a modified vehicle to get around and go wherever. So just access to the community was very difficult for me. This thing only goes about 7 miles on a full charge, so I don't know how much I want to chance that. With a train, I was able to date her. I was able to do the things, to the point about romance and cheesy romantic. The access to that, the ability to go on my own volition to meet her. I was able to, surprise her, take her on dates, occasionally drop off the poetic note without her knowing. that kind of cheesy stuff, but stuff that anyone who's in love would want to do.
Sure.
I was able to do it because of access to transportation. And then we dated for like a year or so in that, and then one day she was at my house and I popped a question. She slept over, we saw like a movie the night before or something, and I had in a little baggie, because being disabled, it's hard to like get up and go find it and then bring the ring to her. I forgot where I put it.
I remember that was another conversation that we've had about like, it's a little challenging to be suave in a wheelchair.
Which again is part of the disability, the physical limitations. You're forced to think new ways to do it in a quote unquote normal way. I had the packet. It was this little like baggy thing that you couldn't quite see through, and I asked her to get it for me, like as if it was like a medication or something. Like she didn't know what it was. I was like, "Can you get that out of there?" She's like, "What is it?" And when she felt the ring, she fell into tears because she knew it was about to happen.
Aww.
She said yes, and then we got married.
That's wonderful.
So yeah, no, it was good. We hit it off, and she's a wonderful woman. I don't think I could have met such a good woman had I not been paralyzed.
Wow.
There's a lot of reasons for that, but that's just beside the point.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. And then you have 3 beautiful children, and you're a new dad, and balancing all of that. There's a lot of chaos and love and snuggles, and how do you balance that?
Right. Well, like everything else with the disability, it finds you its own set of dilemmas in every life domain you enter. When it comes to being a parent, right now I'm bigger than them, and I'm faster than them with the wheelchair. So it gives its advantages now. So I got to set the rules down clearly now, so that they don't, when they get bigger than me and faster than me, I could still, exert my influence. It's probably like everything else, but more than anything, as a parent, before I became a parent, I was like worried and insecure about my ability to be a parent. Playing catch up, I can't really throw a ball that well because of the body mechanics involved. Things like that made me doubt how well I could be a parent. But when I had the kids, in a way, probably just like any other father or mother feel, all those doubts kind of just dissipated, because I saw I'm responsible for this life and I will do whatever I have to do for them. And so why is it a joy? It was a joy, of course, that they were born and everything, but the little joys that happen in a day-to-day, I would say I enjoy the heck out of it, because as a professor, I've been teaching my daughter like geography and stuff. We do little tests. Maybe I'm not, too critical of like the way I go about it. I make it fun, but I get great enjoyment out of teaching them stuff. Going outside, the solar eclipse we just had. Make sure they wear their little goggles. But just teaching them about stuff, expanding their minds early on. That I get a very kind of a philosophical pleasure, but it is a genuine pleasure to me to do that. And the challenges, I would say, more than anything, are just acknowledging like where I can and can't be a helpful husband to my wife when she's like juggling the baby's crying. I can't really change the diaper without getting poop all over my hand. So in those regards, that's a challenge, but most of it gets resolved when you kind of act more proactively, where like if the baby's crying, I'll take the other 2 kids out of the room just to at least de-stress her. I mean, that's kind of the philosophy I developed. If I can keep her not as stressed, that's the key.
That's a good, right.
It's like that.
Yeah. And that's anyway in any marriage too. You kind of have your
There's
strengths and challenges.
It's not
and
that different, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But was the disability? It's just mostly in that domain of like just certain physical activities are limited. Like anywhere the kids go right now, I can't unbuckle them from the child seats. So it's that, but those wind up being small limitations because we do things as a family. You just learn where the holes are and the strengths are and the abilities are in your given situation. But the challenges, I gotta be honest, I'm quite lucky and privileged to say they've been relatively few being a father. And of course, if you interview me when they're teenagers, I don't know what I'm gonna say. But
yeah, we should do that in like a number of years too. Yeah, I'd be really curious to know, in a number of years or when they're in college, like what they're going to study, and if their like life trajectory as yours, like is different, because having you and Rachel as mom and dad like might be different than someone who doesn't have a disability too. Like I'm just so curious about but we can look into the future on the lens of that. So
well, I mean, certainly a lot of the shows they watch as kids now will include a lot of like disability representation, which when I was a kid that didn't practically even exist.
Right.
So I suspect that's good for everybody. But certainly as a parent who has a disability with a child, I think my kids will grow up having, in a way, a little bit more sensitivity and understanding, or at least not, grow up with that stigmatizing perspective on things like, oh, I have a daddy who's like
it's
that.
It's just normalized. It's
right,
like it is.
right.
Yeah, it just is. Wow. And you mentioned a little earlier about your adapted van, and that's so fascinating. And I know it was a huge process to be able to get that, but wow, amazing once you got that independence back again. I mean, you have the public transportation you can use, and you did that independently, but I think I knew you when you were starting to do that process. So tell me a little bit more about that. How long did it take?
Yeah.
What does it look like when you use this adapted van?
Yeah. So huge undertaking is an understatement. So, but I will keep it thorough but brief.
Sure.
Basically, when it comes to getting a modified van, you first go to, every state has its DVR component, Division of Voc Rehab. You kind of sit in on sessions and develop a career plan. So the state will, help you become a taxpayer, basically. You get that, then you go get a voucher from the state to help pay for the modifications, which I'm very grateful for. Because those modifications, unless you have 100,000 laying around, But basically what happens is you get the voucher, you get approved for it, you then go find a dealership that does the modifications. Then out of your own pocket, you have to buy the vehicle, but the voucher pays for the modifications to the vehicle. 6-7 months later, they take the vehicle, they modify it, they do all that. You have to do a few hours of driver training and get a license to operate those kinds of controls, because it's a...
explain what your controls are. That's interesting.
It's interesting, yeah. It's basically a pinwheel that connects to the steering wheel, and every disability is different.
Yeah, and maybe, we can get a picture at some point, and
Absolutely.
I can put that out so everyone can see it too.
Yeah, it's just a pinwheel that spins the main steering wheel, and at least on my left, it's the throttle, it's the accelerator, it's the, back is brake, forward is go, and it's all electronic, it's fully, automated in the car, and I mean, it's all involved, and I don't even know the half of what's going on inside of it, but it allows me to operate it totally independently. The door on the side opens, a ramp comes out, I can roll in, I lock in through a system called Easy Lock. It's like a tractor trailer. Parks
So
into its cab.
you roll your chair
Into the vehicle, right. There's a ramp that comes out the side. They gut the inside. There's no middle bench seat. That's all clear. It's an open space. You roll in, you park in front of the steering wheel, and then, they have these little tri-pins, because I can't make grips with my fingers. They kind of hold my hands, and so when I'm driving, you steer left and right, spin it to the left and right, and gas and brake. And there's a cool little red button on the left for blinkers, wipers. You click it 5, 6, 7 times for different functions. You have to learn this stuff.
It's a lot of cognition involved
but
there.
It eventually becomes second nature.
Yeah.
But I will say that when I got the van modified, I got it in 2017. Radically different.
Yeah.
Again, grateful that there's public transportation, and a lot of it leaves a lot to be desired, but it got me from A to B. But when I was able to just, at my whim, go out, that was a real big step in my rehab, because prior to that, I depended on everybody else's schedule. I had to fit into everybody else's lifestyle. I had no my own lifestyle. Now I can go see interesting lectures by philosophers at Rutgers, or just go out on dates, or pick someone up instead of other people picking me up. It was a big shift toward my ultimate goal.
That's great. Wow, it's good that you persevered through that, all the adversity of
doing
that. Yeah,
but it was worth it.
Are there a lot of dealerships that do that? Yeah, I didn't think so. Yeah.
I can count. Well, when you get the voucher, you have to. There's a bidding process where each of the main was 4 or 5, maybe. They bid how much the modifications will cost, and then you just decide, and the state pays for it accordingly. There's a handful, and the one I use right now is up in Fairfield, I believe. It's kind of far away, but that's just why we wound up going with it, because it was recommended. And they modified it. They finished it in about 6 to 7 months. And then after I passed all the checks, all the paperwork was done, I was able to drive it home.
Great. Wow.
Yeah, so it was a big difference. Yeah.
I can say. One of the other things that I always found very interesting about you, and I know you don't do it anymore because you're a dad and a loving husband and everything, but you've got to tell me about the skydiving experience that you had, and your want to get the death wish out of you before you started a family and everything. So I just not have ever gone skydiving myself. I'm just curious, what is it like when they open that door and you're out the plane?
Well, to start with the phrasing of the death wish, that might be a little misleading, but it did touch on something, because at the time, I wasn't like chronically suicidal, but the thought of checking out did cross my mind. And there was something about, like, in a way, like, being ambivalent about my own mortality, just dealing with what I was dealing with and trying to, like, figure out what am I going to do with my life. It was kind of almost spontaneous that I decided to go skydiving. And the first time I went was with Teddy Atlas. He's part of I think the runner of the Teddy Atlas Foundation. It's like a philanthropic organization. I met him at Kessler. He came there, and he does support services. Teddy Atlas is like a famous boxing trainer, and it was kind of just in conversation, and then just out of nowhere I mentioned it, and I wound up going with him to skydive, and he had his own feelings about it, but he jumped to his credit. But when I went, it was interesting. I was very detached in a way from the whole experience, because again, at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do with life. I was almost, this is where my phrasing of the death wish came in. Like, I almost didn't care. Like, say, listen, if I'm going to go out, hell, what an interesting way to go if something bad happened up there. But when I went up, they take you up to like 13 or 14,000 feet, and you're really high up. And the flight up there was like a few minutes long, but the drop was only like maybe 1 or 2 minutes at most. The view was incredible. But what was wild was that something you don't really realize, but you'll see it if you think about it, the feeling of the moisture hitting your face when you fall through a cloud. Because they're wet, you don't think about that. And I was like, oh my God, look at this.
Wet, yeah,
it's so really weird. So the aesthetics of the experience were actually quite interesting. But I didn't really feel fear or anything, because again, at the time I was almost wrestling on, whether or not, it was at that time, when you kind of feel that death and life are really not that much different, and have all these weird confusions in your mind. And so I wasn't really worried or concerned or anxious. I was just kind of observing the event. And so just on the sheer surface of how amazing of an experience it is wild to jump out of the plane and skydive. But that, to some extent, did change my relationship with my own mortality, because, as you said, if asked to go today, I would decline, because I have things tying me to this world now. I have a reason to be connected. Not that I'm suicidal, so don't worry about that, but I mean like prior to having kids and being married, for that matter, if I went, nothing matters. It doesn't, that's how I was thinking at the time. But now I have 3 beautiful beings, 4 if you count my wife, that tie me to the world of the living. And so that's why I would decline, because I would have a reason to be anxious. What if something did go wrong?
There you go. Right.
But at first, I just think I needed that, in a sense that I was trying to see how far I would push this ambivalence toward death. And at the very time, it was cool to have experienced and everything, and just to have done it. But interestingly enough, I wound up going 3 times.
3 times? Well, that's the thing, yeah.
The first, I said, it was a spontaneous one, but what happened was my friends found out I went, and they got interested, so I kind of just tagged along. I was like, yeah, been there, done that. Let's do it again, why not? Because again, that whole time, this was in the first 3 years of doing it, I was still kind of, again, the whole reluctance to go again didn't start to happen until later on, I would say. But I was still, I was wrestling with a lot, and kind of, it didn't matter to me in a way. There's a overlay of apathy and all the things that come with adjusting to being paralyzed.
And what was the time frame from when you were discharged from the rehab facility to when you did the skydiving? And then I know there's the college in there too. Like, was it?
I was discharged in 2017 in April from Kessler. I went back to school that summer to philosophy course. And not 2017, I'm sorry.
I know, I was going to say 2007, right?
2007. I'm sorry. Oh no, please do. Yeah, 2007. Yeah, it was 2008. It was about a year, less than a year, because it was in the warmer weather. So it was probably around a year after I was discharged. I had gone back to school, finished that philosophy course, and then in the summer or so, or spring of 2008 was the first time. I'm pretty sure the next time was later that year, and then again in 2009. Yeah, so like very, very nearly after being injured in that time.
Like almost not even 2 years, right? Or
yeah, it was 2006 I was injured.
Yeah, right.
July 30th of 2006 I was injured. Did my rehab at the hospital, etc. Discharged. So yeah, by 2009, within 3 years I was, poking around at life.
Love it. That's so great. And so how do you keep your positive attitude? I mean, there's like, you in your psychology career, you know that there's like the stages of grieving and all of that you have to go through, and there are good days and there are not good days. And I think that's really important for anybody, is to know how to, like, focus on that power of positive thinking. And how do you keep yourself positive? What are some rules and routines?
So this question is one I brewed on before you came here very much, because I think it's in a way a question I do have an answer to, and I want to give you an honest answer. And I would say my outlook is not so much best described as positive, but not negative either. I honestly would describe it as more ambivalent. And if I may, it's not positive only in the sense that when it comes to having a positive outlook on life, in a way this injury had that kind of destructive and life-altering effect, traumatizing you might say, that does take away from that kind of taken for grantedness of the joy and enthusiasm and kind of like almost hope and good outlook that is genuine, that I don't feel I could ever truly recover. But it's not a negative outlook on life, because at the same time the same destructiveness humbled me and cleared my perspective on life in a way that made me, lose my pretenses of my ego. I couldn't lie to myself, right? I was every day the evidence was right in front of my face. So it put me in this kind of neutral way, and then you sprinkle in a little philosophy, and I find that it was more than anything, my outlook on life is just a liberating one, because and I don't mean to get waxing philosophical, but in believing and seeing that all of it is in a way meaningless, kind of clears the ground and is liberating, in that I am now not trapped by the challenges of life, because they just don't carry their harmful bite, because I know it's just a passing moment. It's just whatever. But at the same time, because of that, I don't get hung up on bad things. So I know it's almost positive in the sense that challenges and bad events in my life won't carry the grip on me that they would have, precisely because I know it's all ultimately meaningless. And in that sense, you might say it's a positivity. It's almost not Candide, what's his name? Panglossian optimism. This is Candide. Never mind. I'm getting digressing.
Okay, no.
But the point being that it's my outlook on life is ambivalent, but in a way that's productive. And so that's why I kind of shied away with the word positivity, because I'm not one for those kind of aphoristic, positive, poster kind of things. I'm maybe just too much of a cynic for that. I don't know. But I will say to a lot of people that, the view you can have on life can be not necessarily positive or negative, but just in a way open the door for you to be able to face the challenges in a way that you, at the end of the day, would feel you did it right. And everybody's going to come to their own understanding, just as I have myself, of how they make sense of their lives and their forward-looking future. But what really got me through the injury was, I would say, a mix of the trauma of being paralyzed, all the stripping away of everything I assumed, everything I knew, everything I took for granted. And then what kind of filled that gap was a lot of the kind of philosophy and intellectual reading helped me, what they call in psychology, cognitively reframe. So I used the term, and I forget exactly how I phrased it in grad school for an assignment to a professor, but I said that this was a forced opportunity, this injury, because it was forced, because this was just thrown at me. I didn't choose this to happen. And despite the difficulties and obstacles I faced, it nevertheless was an opportunity to live a second time. I very much feel like my life before the injury was my first round, and now I have the privilege of a different but second chance. And that really is the kind of the key of it being this forced opportunity, that I should be dead, kind of, with the kind of car accident I was in. I assume not many people would survive that. But now, starting from that point, it feels like as if whatever I do in this second chance, this second life, is totally for me to decide, and I'm not bothered in a way by the challenges, because in a way, it doesn't have the grip on me because in a way I'm already dead. I don't mean to sound so
No,
silly,
it makes complete
but
sense.
it very much
Forced
helped me
opportunity, that's a very interesting perspective. Never even thought about that, but it is the second chance at life. And, I mean, it'd be interesting for you to go back in time and talk to the Joe Cali that's 16 years old and kind of, look at that and then say like, here's what's your future. And, that's just very...
Yeah. I mean, there's the whole
Lots to think about there.
There is. And that was part of my struggle and perhaps why I kind of took a liking to philosophy, because one of the things it resonated because it was doing exactly what I already was doing with the injury, that with my injury and being forced to reevaluate everything in my existence top to bottom. Turns out that's exactly what philosophy is trying to get at. You want to figure out what are the right questions to ask, kind of taking on different perspectives. So those two were just compatible in a way. Yeah.
A couple other questions. So you had mentioned that you are focusing now on exercise and healthy eating. What does that look like in your life?
I like to joke that it's an early midlife crisis.
There you go.
It's really just, after getting married, having kids, getting established, getting into the grind of work, your own personal health often takes a back seat to the kids, the family, the bills, etc. Right. Yeah. And so just me especially though, since I can't go for a jog and burn off the calories, etc. as easily as possible, I would say recently there was no real specific event. It was just like me recognizing that, it'd be good to stay as, healthy as possible for the sake of my long-term health, but also my ability to fulfill the roles I want to fulfill as a husband and as a father, and just as a person, just doing activities and being around. And so I started, I kind of just really picked up where I left off, because before I was injured, I used to, when I exercised, I listened to different music, but for whatever reason, there's a Pink Floyd album called Metal that just has the right kind of songs in sequence that you could kind of listen to it as one big song. And for whatever reason, I used to exercise to that. It's like a good 50-minute album. So you get a good 50 minutes.
The whole album you would
It's about 50 minutes, right.
Mm-hmm.
So from start to finish, I just started listening to it again. And the beginning of it, if you ever listen to it, it starts out like really fast paced. So you get a good strong start, get the blood flowing, and then it tapers down to a lot of these mellow songs for the next like 30 minutes. And as well as I do, in the rehab clinics, the arm bikes that are like $15,000 plus. Well, I don't have that kind of money, so I do this. I just do my faux arm bike, as I call it, and I just pedal. And so I get my little isokinetics in at the beginning, and then I get my aerobic exercise for the remaining 30. And I've been doing that every day, wherever I could find the time to do it. But just kind of fell into a pattern of it, just to get, and I feel healthier. I feel, I've lost weight, and it just makes me feel better, helps the swelling and all that stuff. So I'm already seeing the physical
respiration,
benefits.
Everything.
Yeah, I was able to clear my throat much better and everything like that, especially in our day and age of COVID. I want to be able to clear my throat. And also when it comes to food, I don't know any magic tricks about that. I just simply, whenever my wife cooks, I hate the fact that she's such a good cook because I enjoy eating the meals, so I try to divide it by 2. So I still get all my A's, B's, and C's, just 50% of them to kick back and stuff, because I'm Italian. I love to eat, so that was a little bit of a challenge, but I just remind myself that like my goal here is to be healthy, so I can still enjoy the food, just a smaller portion. And I just kind of, the other half I'll just put in the fridge. That becomes my lunch. That's how I do it. Good
plan. Another role and routine that's ongoing too, and just to help support your family and live a very healthy, productive life for your kids and your wife and everything too. So, is there a specific moment or story in your life journey so far that you kind of feel was very pivotal? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of them out there, but or interaction or
the word scares me only because the only pivotal moment in my life was the day I got paralyzed, and everything else kind of whittles down into nothingness. And those there's the pivots that just aren't pivots because they're so just starkly
they're mini
different.
pivots.
They're
Yeah, they're
mini
mini
pivots.
pivots. There you go. Right.
But that I think gets at the key here is that after my injury and this shift to a new life, it was just a bunch of just thousands of little pivots. And so I really, just to give you a totally genuine answer, I would say after my injury, there was no individual defining moment that really explains anything. It's like the people I've met, the lectures I've taken, the thoughts I've had, the places I've been, all these little things just build up slowly, give me little tiny breadcrumbs that kind of congealed into my current view on my life. I mean, it was just my injury set the tone that now just kind of like is unfolding going forward. But what I do with this going forward was just really a complex amalgam of just so many little things that have happened in life. If there were any big moments in my life, it would probably be when I got married and had my kids.
It's just like anybody
those
would.
classic things, like the obvious things,
Exactly.
which I want to give credit to, but as it relates to my own recovery and development, things like getting the car were big. Those things that gave me more independence, because their importance here, the salience is that they now enabled me to go further in my recovery. So it's in that sense, those are pivotal, I would say, absolutely. But wise of experiences that kind of pushed me to become a counselor, a therapist, or to even to pursue the things I pursue, I think those were just kind of almost developmental, slow and building on top of each other to make me the person I am today. And of course, a mix of the personality that I brought into from the previous life. I'm a little stubborn, but I'm also extroverted, a little neurotic. Things like that, those help. Those that have their own way of complementing each other.
Sure.
Yeah, but that's kind of my view, at least on it.
And what's next for you? What do you kind of see in the next, I don't know, 10, 15, or however many years?
So
you can think of small, like 10 years, you can think of 50 years, you can think of whatever, you know, just, but curious, what's next?
Sure. The next probably big thing, well, these are kind of everyday concerns, like going on vacations with family and trying to, do those things with the kids. But wise of like my own kind of developments, I am kind of tempted to maybe into my 40s go back to school to get either another master's or maybe even a PhD. And that I'm kind of torn on too, because it would either be in like philosophy and try not to vomit statistics, because I fell in love with stats in undergrad and I became very self-taught in it. I learned a lot to the point about building into opening doors for me in my career. I've tutored PhDs in stats. It's really just remarkable how much just a little effort learning the hard math really opens doors to you. So just from my own purely intellectual edification, my pursuits, I might consider doing that. But again, that's probably going to be my 40s because college is expensive. It's not cheap.
Right.
That would be hopefully in the next 10 years. And then why is it just my broader normal life? Probably nothing. I'm kind of liking the path I'm on. Yeah. In fact, if I could stay as a adjunct professor even into my 80s, and just comfortably retire. If I could just stay the course right now, I'm happy where I'm at.
Right. Yeah, and just knowing from personal experience, watching you teach, it's just you're very charismatic. You really engage your class too for so many, and you're born academician for sure.
I do, yeah, and I sometimes I go too far sometimes, but I think that what you're saying is really part of what I want to be, because that notion of just having stuff put right in front of your face, I mean, not rudely or inappropriately, but just like when you're delivering a lecture, when you're delivering knowledge or information, you have to get it at them in a way that really makes them open their eyes, it really clicks and registers with them. And it's that in a bigger sense. Why I do that is because my injury threw the truth right in front of my face. There was no denying it. I was thrown into this new world in a way that made me open my eyes. And if, to the extent that I'm teaching, I don't want to scare them or traumatize them, but I want to open their eyes. I want to give them it in a way that really makes it register, that might make them go down a path or two of different options, whether it be in academia or even just think differently about their lives and appreciate, the ability to walk and things like that, but even more than that, just, the ephemeral nature of our existence, that, in about, 7 or 8 decades, it's all going to be over for them. And so it gives it adds a richness to life and appreciation that I don't think I would have had I not gotten injured. I know that's one of your questions. It's one of your things. I like that very much.
Yeah. And certainly, there are, this is the whole reason that, I really want to get this podcast out into the world, is to tell stories such as yourself that, people do have these challenges, but you can, really have a second life, or if you're born with a disability, come into like a life that might be a little bit different, but still might be, purposeful and fulfilling, and just really have, a purpose, period. So, your story is certainly, very evident, and I'm very pleased that you're my first focus for this podcast, because you just really pulled everything together.
I'm honored. I think this is awesome, and I totally support you in this. And on that point, to go to the perspective taking, I think one of the dialogue when we were talking, one of the questions you were going to raise was that, when it comes to like what other people need to know about it or something. I very much, I forget exactly how I was like rehearsing it in my mind, but I wanted to say something like, people should know that it's much more difficult living with disability than they probably imagine, but not nearly as impossible as they fear. That there are challenges, but I'd like to be real. It's difficult. Everything from how the dual relationship of my wife as my romantic partner and my caregiver, that's a juggling act, right? Sadly, because of the inefficiencies of insurance to cover home health aides and other support services, often falls in the family. That's a big piece of it. There's real challenges that anyone who's disabled has to have a sober reckoning with to get through it and live with it. But in that kind of juxtaposition, I kind of liken it to how a rich person sees everybody else, that they don't understand that they underestimate how difficult it is having to worry about bills and everything, but they also don't realize that it's not so bad not having a handmaiden or a butler or someone flying a helicopter to get you to groceries every day. You could live without that. So it's just like that, just to relate it to being able-bodied. A filthy rich person would be like, they don't how did I phrase the other one? It was, they see living with an average income, they don't see how difficult it is, but it's also not as impossible as they probably think it is. And in a similar way, it's with disability, that one can have a fulfilling life, inspire love in a partner, enjoy things, do things, despite the challenges. And just like everything else in our lives, even not disabled, SHIT happens, right? Everybody's got, you live long enough, something bad's gonna happen. But that's how I took it.
Yeah, and you've spun it to such good, and putting such good into the world and inspiring your students, and it's just a very, very, very good story here.
No, thank you so much. I love it. I really enjoy this, and I love the opportunity you gave me to even do those lectures and stuff. Not only because it looked great on my CV, and thank you so much for that.
No worries.
But the connection. Look, before I was injured, you asked me what psychology was. You asked me about disability. You throw on the word tetraplegia, quadriplegia. I don't know what the hell that was. This is, one of the big differences that I don't think would have ever happened to me had I not become paralyzed, is that I never would have expanded my understanding of the world and seen things the way I see them. And there's a weird, almost like gratitude I feel, that despite being paralyzed, that I almost wouldn't trade what I have now for an able body. And again, I see why an able body is desirable and everything, I get that, but if I couldn't kind of have my perspective, my knowledge, what I'm working with in a way right now, and my kind of resilience to experience thanks to my cognitive reframing, I don't want that body,
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
Gosh, wow, you really just captivated everything of, adjusting that lens and unbidden triumphs, really, there's a very surprising triumphs in situations that happen in life, and it's all how you reframe it.
That it's funny that unbidden triumphs, I am seeing some connection there to the way I phrased the forced opportunity.
Forced opportunity. Now I don't know. Should I change it to forced opportunity?
No.
No, I like it
unbidden
though.
triumph.
Trademark you on that.
Because you can have it. It's all yours. But it is very much like that. You got something you didn't ask for. You were put in a position, what was something happened, you were thrown into, as they say in philosophy, that the opportunity of it is what comes of it, in a way that's like, it opens the space to make something of your life that you were now forced into having to make the choice. But that unbidden triumph, in a way, is an analogous notion that, this is not something that, this is just, like I'm thinking unbidden thoughts in psychology with like what do you call that? Flashbacks, like trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But the unbidden, like you didn't ask for it, it just came up on you, and now you have something to deal with, but it nevertheless turned out to be a positive, good thing, a progress or a success or a victory of some sort, and yeah, no, I think that totally connects, and that makes the best sense, especially because, as I see it, you're gearing toward getting the messages out there to help people to turn those opportunities into triumphs rather than tragedies. No, I love it.
Thanks, Joe. Well, thank you again for being a part of this, my journey here as a new podcaster. I'm so excited.
No, good luck to you.
Thank you.
This
And
cool.
looking forward to, the next story that will come out as well. And
I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, thank you. Anything remaining before we wrap up?
No, you got my gears turning, but I said what I needed to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.